Hi, this is Jim Lopes. I'm Visitor Services Supervisor at Farber Heritage State Park. And every year around this time, we try to have an exhibit about the Portuguese culture in the region. This year, we're privileged to have an exhibit by the Portuguese American Archives at Umass, Dartmouth. Okay, this one's called "A Glimpse into Portuguese American Immigration," and it's a very interesting exhibit. I saw this. I was up at Umass looking at something else, and I saw this exhibit, and I said, I need to have that in Fall River. We need to share this with the people of Fall River. So the Portuguese, for over 500 years, there have been Portuguese in North America. They came as navigators, explorers, and adventurers seeking new lands and riches. As immigrants to the United States, however, they are a relatively recent group. Portuguese immigration in the U.S. occurred in two major waves. The first was associated with the country's industrial development at the turn of the 20th century and peaked around 1920, with 82,489 persons arriving between 1910 and 1920. This exhibit says that's the first wave, but we all know the first wave is the whalers coming into New Bedford. And I know this is Fall River, but yes, we had whalers. I have to say this because I'm a Cape Verdean American, and my grandfather and great-grandfather were immigrants from the Portuguese Empire as whalers. So back to my exhibit. This immigration phase came to a halt in the 1920s with the passage of the National Origins Act, which established a very low immigration quota for Portugal. As a result of these laws, a 30-year period of immigration dormancy ensued. From the late 1920s to the middle of the 1950s, very few Portuguese arrived in the U.S., and many returned to Portugal. Some of them were American-born, with their American-born children and spouses. Those who stayed remained primarily industrial workers on the East Coast and agricultural workers in California. There are also thousands of Portuguese who migrated to Hawaii. We know that because we see the ads for Hawaiian sweetbread, and we know better. We know that's Portuguese sweetbread, don't we? We know that. We see the Hawaiians playing the ukulele, and we know that that came from Portugal. That came from the Madeirans. But not everybody knows that, but we're privileged here because Bristol County, Massachusetts, and Bristol County, Rhode Island, the largest concentration of Portuguese people in the country. The second wave peaked around 1970, was substantially larger than the first one. Between 1970 and 1979, for example, 104,754 persons entered the U.S. This immigration phase began with the passage of the Azorean Refugee Act of 1958, which allowed families affected by the eruption of the Capeliños volcano and the Azorean island of Fayal to settle in the U.S. Its major cause, however, was the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which abolished national quotas, introduced a system of immigration based on family reunification. Since the 1980s, Portuguese immigration in the U.S. has been declining and now stands at around 1,000 persons per year. Those numbers have changed considerably. But think about that, the big gap in immigration. I know, and again, my family's history, my grandmother managed to come in before the quotas ended in 1921, but nobody else, 1921, but there were no new family members coming in until 1975. So a lot of our families have gaps. According to estimates by the U.S. Census Bureau, there are currently close to 1.5 million persons of Portuguese ancestry living in the U.S. They are found in all the U.S. states and territories, but about 57% live in only 3 states, California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. While they have become successfully integrated into American society, the Portuguese continue to hold on to many aspects of their culture of origin. This exhibit, which is based on images from the Ferreira Mendes Archive at Umass Dartmouth, gives you a glimpse into their lives. The Farber Line was the only steamship company that had direct voyages between the Azores and Portugal to the south coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It advertised itself in 1913 as having steamships that comprise the present express passenger fleet, have all been constructed since 1902 with special regard to the requirements of Mediterranean travel, are all staunch, trim, and fast, and equipped with modern safeguards. Afonso Gil Mendes Ferreira was born in Beira Baixa, Portugal, and immigrated to Taunton, Massachusetts in 1920. It was a typical voyage for an immigrant during the early 20th century. He traveled on a ship of the very active Farber Line on a voyage that lasted approximately 10 days in third class with about 1,050 other Portuguese immigrants. Family Portraits offers a glimpse into the private lives of individuals. At the same time, they reflect major trends of the time, such as industrialization, urbanization, expansion, and diversification of the market economy, and the increase in social stratification. These family portraits also demonstrate their adherence to Portuguese American cultural traditions. Portuguese Americans established newspapers as early as the late 1880s, just as the first wave of immigration was beginning. These newspapers were sustained through the turn of the century, and while there was a downturn in newspaper publication in the mid-20th century, a few newspapers targeted the Portuguese American community remain in print today. Much like radio, television, and community publications, their primary intent was to sustain the Portuguese culture and to ease the immigrants' transition into American society. Like all other histories, the history of Portuguese American immigration is varied and more complex than often acknowledged. Within it are tales of immigrants importing, smuggling, contraband, deportations due to illiteracy and ill health, and difficult transitions for those coming from Cabo Verde who lived fractured lives and identities as Cape Verdeans, Africans, Portuguese, and African Americans. St. John the Baptist, San João Batista, was the first church serving the religious needs of the Portuguese community in North America. It held its first Mass in Portuguese in 1871 and officially closed in 2012. St. John, like many other Portuguese American parishes, assisted the immigrant community in continuing religious traditions such as the Feast of Santa Cristo and the Holy Ghost that were familiar and brought religious comfort to them. St. John the Baptist is in New Bedford. Immigrating. In 1970, the first of two pieces of legislation was passed that began to severely limit immigration from Portugal. The requirement for all individuals over the age of 16 to pass a literacy test, and the creation of immigration quotas formalized in the 1924 Immigration Act that restricted entry to 2% of the total number of people of each nationality in the U.S. according to the 1890 National Census. Edmund Denise, Massachusetts House of Representatives 1949 to 1951, New Bedford City Council 1952 to 53, Massachusetts State Senate 1953 to 1957, Treasurer of Bristol County, Massachusetts 1973-1979, Bristol County District Attorney 1973-1975, Tony Cabral, Massachusetts State Representative 1990 to the present, with Eduardo da Souza Lima and Massachusetts State Senator Michael Rodrigues. Carlton Viveros, Mayor of Fall River 1977 to 1990. Arthur Goulard, first person to be elected to public office from southeastern Massachusetts, first person of Portuguese descent, Massachusetts House of Representatives 1928 to 1932. Mary Fonseca, Massachusetts State Senate 1953 to 1984. As Assistant Majority Leader, she was the first woman to hold a leadership position in the Massachusetts Senate. SATA, which is Sociedade Açoriana de Transportes Aéreos, has existed since 1947. Its flights were limited to travel between the islands of Santa Maria and Terceira. In 1971, with the advent of its partnership with the commercially successful TAP, Transport Air Portugal, it was able to improve its commercial offerings. Subsequently, immigrants were able to travel via air rather than by sea, as they had been forced to do so previously. Portuguese American television and radio programs informed the community, provided a bridge between political and social actors, influenced perceptions of pressing issues, and often played a role in affirming or trying to change existing public opinion. Radio and television programs have informed the community for over 50 years. Prior to 1890, U.S. immigration policy varied state by state. There were no overarching legal requirements imposed by the federal government upon those who wished to make the U.S. their home. This would change in the last decade of the 1800s with the designation of Ellis Island as a federal immigration station. All individuals who wished to immigrate to the U.S. were required to undergo a physical and mental inspection by an immigration officer prior to being released into the care of relatives, friends, or a future employer. Although it was not until 1924, under the Johnson-Reed Act, that the U.S. established the first consular control system, which required that immigrant visas be obtained abroad from a U.S. consulate before admission, Portugal had strict rules and requirements for those who wished to immigrate as early as the 1830s. The documents that allowed an individual to leave Portugal had to be purchased from civil authorities and included until 1974 at least one of the following: a general exit passport, an immigration passport, and or a military service dispensation. In general, first-generation Portuguese Americans had low levels of educational attainment and were primarily confined to low-paying, unskilled jobs. The second-generation offspring were able to work in public sector jobs and to support Portuguese American owned businesses and professional establishments. As Portuguese Americans began to own and operate their own businesses, the need to advertise in an effective and efficient manner became apparent. One of the most popular and captivating methods used was calendars. The calendars often portrayed a strong ethnic identity with a heralding to Portuguese and American core values and interests. These calendars were displayed in homes throughout the year and were often sent back to Portugal to family and friends. The Portuguese American community throughout the U.S. has organized itself around a significant number of social, civic, recreational, and cultural associations. These included advocacy organizations, heritage language schools, academic centers, social and sports clubs, scholarship and educational foundations, fraternal and mutual aid organizations, professional and business associations, libraries, theatrical groups, brass bands, dancing and musical groups, philanthropic affiliations, churches, and other religious groups. Ethnic community publications often get their start and grow during times of political change. This was the case with the Portuguese American community, which saw a considerable number of magazines and journals starting in the 1960s to coincide with the Immigration Nationality Act of 1965, and continuing into the 1970s when the second wave of immigration was at its peak. These publications not only connected the new immigrants to their home countries, but were also used to educate and acculturate them to their new home. Now, people who aren't in this exhibit, but who are Portuguese, that you'd be surprised at, throw out a few names. Tom Hanks. His mother's family is from the Azores. Katy Perry. She's a Pereira. Joe Perry, he's a Pereira. John Philip Sousa, the band conductor, and Joe Raposo, our famous Azorean composer. They're all Portuguese Americans. So I invite you to Farber Heritage State Park. Come see our exhibit. There's a lot to see here.
Para fazer os calções.